This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. I'm back in the studio here in Colorado. Been on the road here for a little bit, meeting some entrepreneurs and investors who are investing in interesting companies. Spent a little bit of time in Florida, and now I am back here in Colorado. This week's topic is one that actually resulted from a question. I recently wrapped up finishing teaching a 3.5-day innovation bootcamp course here in Colorado, and one of the participants came up afterwards and asked me an interesting question. Now, I answered it during the workshop, but I've actually had some more time to actually think about it here a little bit, and I thought the question was interesting, an interesting look at what are some of the issues or challenges facing innovation in general, just the general perception of it, the willingness to invest in it. And so today's show, I'm going to basically riff off of this question, which was, what are the challenges facing innovation? And I've broken them down into 4. So what are the 4 challenges that are facing innovation? And as innovators, things that all of us need to be conscious of and be prepared to address. Now, they cover a wide range of topics. I'm going to take each one in each of the segments of the show today so that you can kind of get a little bit of a deeper understanding of kind of where my thought process is, but also, giving you enough information that you can collect your own thoughts, your own ideas, what it is you think about each of these 4 challenges. Now, keep in mind, this is my personal opinion. Doesn't mean that it's gospel. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me. Doesn't mean you need to go do anything, because it may not be something that impacts you or your organization or the innovations that you're trying to work on. So what are these? First one up is one that you've heard me riff on, and I've been on this topic, and maybe I need to kind of get off this high horse here a little bit, but it's still something that just really just rubs my fur the wrong way, and that is ethics in innovation. We've had some pretty high-profile, unethical actions around what people claim the capabilities of some innovations to be. Some of these poster childs includes companies like Theranos, which I think is the poster child for unethical innovation. All kinds of promises of what Theranos was going to be able to do, what it was going to be able to, its capabilities, what it really did do, and, way overselling, not even just overselling. I think this is more than overselling. Actually lying about what an innovation can or cannot do. It isn't an issue of, playing in the gray areas, but this is just crossing the line. The result, though, is now people are, in some cases, losing the hope of innovation. I tend to be very positive. I'm very hopeful of the future. I think innovation plays an important role of not only improving our own lives, but our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives. You think back to some of the really great innovations that were transformative, like the polio vaccine, the invention of medical devices and new pharmaceuticals and things like that have had transformative lives, saved people's lives, and overall just increased our ability to enjoy life and spend more time with our children and those kinds of things. People are losing that hope. It's sometimes viewed that innovation is really just about a bunch of people who are innovating for personal gain. Hurry up, come up with an idea, get it to a minimal size, hurry up and IPO it, or hurry up and sell it so you can make a boatload of cash and you can ride off into the sunset. Now, at the same time, what really drives it when you kind of peel back this whole issues of ethics, right? I think fundamentally that's driven by this fear of failure, this fear of having to stand up and say, guess what? I was wrong. I was wrong on this idea. We had this hypothesis. We've tested it out. And guess what? It's not going to work. Now, had Theranos done that and said, hey, guess what? It's not going to work. We're going to pivot. We're going to do something completely different. We're going to retract on our message. Great. There's thousands and thousands of highly successful companies that did not go after what their first focus was on. But in these cases, when you really peel back on these companies that have just crossed the ethical line on innovation, it really is about this fear of failure. Now, where does this fear of failure come from? Is it, something that people learned as kids? Don't want to disappoint your parents. Uh, maybe being ridiculed. You're standing in class, teacher asks you a question, you get the answer wrong, and there's some form of ridicule, so you'll do anything to avoid that. This fear of failure is, I think, the underlying engine. And I think we need to do something in society, in our work environments, in the educational system to get that fear of failure out of the whole nomenclature. Fear of failure is the number one challenge from the standpoint of getting people over the hump to even think of themselves as being highly creative. It is this fear that I'm going to get called out, I'm going to do something wrong, I'm going to say something wrong, and as a result, I'm going to look stupid. You know, Look, I suffered from this early on in my career. I used to be highly self-conscious of what people thought of me. And if you want more background on that, go over to YouTube, search under TEDx, watch my TED video. You'll get the whole background story from my TED talk. But I think this fear of failure is one that I think holds an increasingly large amount of people back from success. And I think this fear of failure is what pushes people to cross that ethical line and literally destroy the confidence in them, and in some cases, destroying people's perceptions of what is the value of innovation. Now, let's take a look at the Theranos. Why was that such a big deal of crossing the line? I think part of the challenge with Theranos was the fact that the board of directors had no real sophistication when it came to breakthrough innovation and the risk associated with it, and how hard is it, and validating and pushing back and challenging. You had leading people on the board, Joel Schultz and a number of other major big name statesmen, politicians, investors, but none of them had what I would call real innovation sophistication. They didn't have the ability to really evaluate, understand what the challenge was with regards to innovation, the fact that you are dealing with unknowns and that you may need to pivot, change your direction based on, what it is you heard or learned. And I think one challenge for board of directors for companies is to think about how do you increase that innovation sophistication? People who are intimately familiar with innovation, not sophisticated with technology, not just sophisticated with product development, but sophisticated and understand and had personally experienced the development of a breakthrough innovation. Years ago, I got asked by a reporter about a specific, very well-known, well-recognized person in Silicon Valley. If I told you their name, you would know right off the top of your head. And this was with regards to some bad investment decisions that were made. And the immediate answer was, well, look, this person's on the board. They should know. They should be familiar with it. What happened? I said, well, hold on. Your expectation is that person, because they're a big name and that they did a company and they had some success, then that they should have brought that innovation sophistication to the board. And that's not the case. This particular person developed a product that was the second or third or fourth entry into that segment, had just incremented on the product, had never done a breakthrough innovation, right? But they hit it at the right time, banked a bunch of dollars, made a buku amount of money on the deal, but that doesn't mean they have the innovation sophistication. And when you think about ethics and innovation, you need those checks and balances. Where do those checks and balances come from with regards to the typical innovation process inside of an organization? And how do you protect an organization against that fear of failure such that people do not push themselves to cross that ethical line? We need to find that checks and balances. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. We're talking today about the 4 challenges facing innovation. We talked about ethics in innovation. The number 2 challenge facing innovation that at least from my opinion, is the unrealistic expectations. Now, it somewhat ties into what we talked about in segment 1, which was about ethics, right? When you set unrealistic expectations, people lose that faith in innovation. That's basically promises not kept. Now, we could joke and point in the back that, look, we were promised flying cars, we were promised, ray guns, and what did we get? We got, Facebook. And is that really the delivery of what we thought the future was going to be like? I'm not talking about science fiction and far future and those kinds of things. What I'm talking about is when a company gets established or a researcher announces a new innovation, there's this tendency to want to overstate what its capabilities are going to be. This kind of overpromise in order to feel like it justifies the money they spent, or to get press coverage, or to I don't know, just our own ego around. Hey, I've invented this really great and cool thing. Isn't this fantastic? And when you set those bars, those are bars you have to cross. Now, I think all of us have done it. I've done it. I've talked about it in the show before about, early in my career, I felt this pressure that I had to kind of maybe push out a little bit, get over the top of my skis a little bit, maybe slightly overpromise with the hope that I would find a way to get there. At the same time, you also don't want to be leaning way back on your skis and way underselling an innovation. Otherwise, you'll never get funded. It takes a little bit of practice to find out where that balance is, or to qualify saying it can do X. And my hope is that if we continue on the path we're on, we're going to find new ways. And if we do that, then we should be able to achieve Y. It's about expectation management. And I think part of it feeds into what I've talked about in the past, is the lack of innovation patience. It's one of the 7 laws of innovation, and that is the patience. Innovation takes longer than you think. There's going to be more, trials and tests and experiments that do not work out. And you have to have the patience that says, hey, I am going to work this through. I'm going to have this grit and really push through and make this thing successful. And it's that lack of innovation patience that I think scares us innovators into maybe overpromising. Yeah, I can get that done in a year, or I can get that done in 2 years. And then, saying, well, once I get them to invest, even if I'm a little bit late, they're going to continue to invest because they've already got so much money into me, they're not going to want to stop. Those kinds of thought processes can get you into trouble really, really quickly. There is this thing called the rule of 18. The rule of 18 says that anybody can get excited and interested about innovation for 18 months. Now, how does that work? Well, the way the rule of 18 works is I can go get anybody excited around an innovation. I'll get them to put a little bit of money in. Then I'll start showing some really quick, fast, early progress. Then we're into the budget cycle. Well, that first budget cycle, people are still excited. They got this high hopes for this innovation. So I get that money from the first budget cycle. Now I'm cranking through. I get to the end of that second budget cycle, If I haven't been able to deliver, all of a sudden people start losing interest. They lose interest quickly. So, what is this done in the innovation space? Is it's trained innovators that you better deliver something that has high impact within 18 months of your first getting approval, or your project is at risk. So what do? We focus on, incremental innovations. We look at quick wins versus, what the path that we would normally take if we're going to try to drive something of significance. Um, it makes us, be very short-sighted. It helps us in some cases manage expectations, but the expectations are so short and so near term that we don't achieve the ultimate innovation objective. And then the result though is that leaders learn not to manage expectations. They get everything chunked down into such small period, chunks of time, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, that it's really not about expectation. It's about watching your shoelaces and making sure you don't trip. So again, the second challenge, number two, that we're talking about today is this unrealistic expectations from innovation. And that's a little bit of our own making, again, because, we want to overstate our invention, our innovation, what its impact is going to be. And to be quite honestly, though, it is also set by what people have seen in the past. The invention of the polio vaccine, which transformed lives. The invention of, Tesla automobiles or rockets now made by private individuals that are reaching out and delivering and returning equipment to the International Space Station, right? We're sitting back and we're just marveled and amazed by these innovation leaps that are out there that are happening, that if we're in the innovation game, we think we need to have something of that caliber in order to get any kind of attention, to get press, to get funding, to get support, to get partners to sign on to what it is we are doing. And what I have found is that particularly when I've been asked to do some due diligence on a new innovation, or to coach or mentor, and the team is presenting me with the innovation that they're working on, you know, it's not hard to figure out when they are way out above their skis. They're over promising it. They're inflating it because they think they need to do that to impress you, or to secure the next round of funding, or to sell a customer. But in reality, what happens is they lose their credibility. As soon as it's found out that they are not managing expectations, and they're way over promising and way over committing anything around the innovation that they're working on, they are done for. They will never raise a dollar. They will never raise any kind of money. They will never be able to secure support for their efforts and their programs. And so it's one of the biggest challenges. I see it happen all the time, where people are making their pitch and just way over promising, way over committing what it is their idea is going to be able to do, and the impact that it's going to have. And when people see through that smoke screen and see that crossing of kind of the line that says, what is realistic expectation for what it is you're working on, as soon as you step over that line and really go to the extreme, start promising, you will lose all your credibility, and you will be done for in the innovation game. So don't cross that line. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today, we're talking about the 4 challenges facing innovation. So far, we've talked about number 1, the ethics in innovation, and in some cases, the lack of ethics. Number 2, the unrealistic expectations from innovation. People have this really high bar. What is realistic about the innovation you're working on? Now, let's talk about number 3, the availability of funding for innovation. Assuming you got everything lined up, the ability to raise money today is as hard as ever. And that's what actually, in some cases, drives people to set unrealistic expectations because they feel like they got to stretch the truth, be a little bit out there in order to be able to attract dollars. Part of this is, again, as I said in the last segment, driven by some of the near term. Investors are looking for that quick return. And likewise, you've got inventors, entrepreneurs who are looking to flip the business. They're not building a business for long term viability. They are optimizing the innovations that they are working on, specifically to assume that it's going to get acquired by somebody. It'll be absorbed by some, other company. And that is a strategy that works, not a strategy I'm interested in. I'm not interested in doing build and flips. Could have done that a long time ago. Probably would have made a lot more money than I've ever made in my career, but it's not what interests me. I'm into, building innovations that have long legs, long life, build great businesses, contribute to industries that I'm interested in. And so it's a little bit different for me. But the availability of funding for innovation is challenging. It's not easy to go out and raise money. It doesn't matter whether you're in Des Moines, Iowa, or Palo Alto, California. People think, oh, I got to go to the Valley in order to raise money. Let me tell you, there are literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of startups in Silicon Valley. 5 guys crammed into a little 2-bedroom apartment, eating pizzas and Mountain Dew, trying to crank out the next greatest thing, and they'll never raise a dime, and they'll blow through their family savings. It's hard. It's like, what's the odds of somebody becoming a rock star or a movie star or, write a New York Times bestseller book? Not everybody can do it. And it may not even be how good the individual is. It could be just timing. So the availability of funding is tough, and it's getting tougher, particularly for innovations that don't fall into kind of the hot spot area that everybody's interested in at any given time. So again, when it comes to the availability of funding, you got to think about along the lines of things like, the rule of 18. If you understand how the rule of 18 works, that then you can coordinate and break down your project. Think about your long-term innovation and chunk it down so that an investor can see some quick, proof points as its funding level increases. But if you understand that the patience of an investor, the patience of a CEO, if you're trying to innovate inside of a large corporation, you got to think about that kind of 18-month kind of timeline. Otherwise, you're just never going to get any of that funding. Let's face it, the other piece is everybody wants to go off and do the brand new thing. They want to be the innovator that develops the very first something or other, whatever it is. And let's think about it though. Are those the ones that really are successful? It's no. Look, Google was not the first search engine. Apple did not develop the first smartphone. Apple did not invent the first smartphone that was all touch. Facebook was not the first search engine. Instagram was not the first photo sharing site. Blah, 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 blah. Just go down the list. You don't have to be first, right? The difference between a good idea and a great idea, in many cases, is not the idea. It's about the timing. And you as an innovator need to be that full package. It isn't just about how cool the new thing is, the shiny object that you've invented, but also it's your ability to be plugged into the customers, plugged into the market, know what that timing is. It's those kinds of people that get the funding. If you're just purely focused on the shiny object, investors typically aren't looking just for those kinds of people. There's thousands of those people. They're looking for people who are more complete, who not understand the customer, they understand the market, they understand what it is they've created, they understand what the impact from their innovations is going to be. They are realistic. They're not overselling. They're not overpromising. In fact, in some cases, they're slightly underpromising, right? So it's undercommit, overdeliver is the catchphrase. And so you need to be thinking about those those kinds of characteristics when you're trying to raise funding. Because I'm telling you, funding is one of the biggest challenges. I hear from thousands of people every year who've got some really great idea that they've been working on, but they've been unsuccessful in securing the funding. So you're back to to my quote that I use all the time, right? Ideas without execution is a hobby. And we're not in the hobby business. Innovations is about making ideas real. You can't make an idea real unless you get secure some funding to do what's necessary to bring that idea to reality. And so you've got to be realistic. You've got to understand what it is you're doing. And you got to have that broader view. It's not about being first. You don't want to be, if you can't be first, then it's not innovative. Wrong. You can be the fourth, fifth, 30th, 50th version of something. But if you've applied some unique insight, you have some insight and familiarity with the marketplace, with the customers and what they want, then guess what? You can displace any form of entrenched leader and take over that spot. Look, Google did it with Yahoo. Google totally, did anybody ever think Yahoo was going to fail? No. Google comes along and crushes them. So you don't have to be first, you have to be the most innovative. Now, part of the other is about funding is you need to innovate your ideas around funding. You've been innovative on whatever this idea is you're working on. Apply that creativity, apply that innovation to different structures of funding. I am amazed at how lack of innovation or how little innovation is shown in crafting funding structures. For instance, okay, you can do customer investment, right? Do you get your customer to pay for your innovation? That's quite common for things like large enterprise applications, et cetera. Convertible debt. There can be some very creative. I did convertible debt on a supercomputer company that I was the CEO of. Oh my God, what has this got to be? 1989, 1990, 91, something like that. A company called Terraplex out of Champaign, Illinois. It was a spinoff from the University of Illinois, and it was a massively parallel supercomputer using a new chip architecture called MISC, or Minimal Instruction Set Computers. And we did a lot of convertible debt because it was a high risk effort. The other was non-governance investment. We use this at HP a lot. Small startups got this really great idea. We would fund it, but we knew that if we funded it, just by the fact that HP was an investor or that HP was a customer of this solution, the market cap of that company was going to go through the roof. So why not offer the opportunity to let the company play some of that upside? Now, at the same time, though, HP was not interested in board seats. It was not interested in getting entangled with the startups. It wasn't willing to take the lead. It was not willing to price the deal. So we structured things what we called non-governance investment. We would take investment, but we would take no governance role, no voting our shares, no board seats, no observer seats, none of that to keep it nice and clean. But we wanted that upside because simply by the fact that we endorsed a technology, we typically saw a huge market cap jump in the companies. Get creative. Look, it's a challenge facing innovation. You've got to raise funding or your idea will never become real. So you've got to find that funding. You've got to be realistic. You got to find the story and the message. You need to be able to be the whole package, not just the inventor, but the ability to really understand the market. And you need to get innovative on the structures and styles of funding investment that work for you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. So far, we've covered 3 of the 4 challenges facing innovation. Number 1 was ethics in innovation. Number 2 was unrealistic expectations from innovation. Number 3 was the availability of funding, the almighty dollar for innovation. And number 4, we're going to talk about what is the government role in innovation. Now, I come from a generation, I was what I call a space kid. I was really into watching the whole space program with Gemini and Apollo, Mercury before that. I remember, sitting in front of the TV watching Neil Armstrong step foot on the moon. I also remember the Apollo 13 and watching to see whether or not we were going to be able to bring the astronauts. And that kind of sparked in me as a kid really my interest in inventing and, going to Mars. And, it just basically reinforced in my mind that, that humans have this inherent ability to invent, to create, almost anything. If we can invent how to build a rocket that takes a man to the moon, there's not a problem we couldn't solve. That was what I grew up with. The challenge we've got today is we need more of those kinds of space programs. If you look at the funding just here in the United States during the space race to what we fund now in, equal dollars, let's keep in mind, we're talking from early 1960s up through 69 through to today, in equal dollars, total dollar spend, government spend for long-range invention, long-range innovation just does not exist anymore. Yeah, we still have DARPA, but DARPA's funding is not kept up with pace of just basic inflation, much less the kinds of investments that we should be putting in place. We're relying more and more on private businesses to invent rather than, going back to the days of when, the U.S. government invented things like, the internet. We didn't classify what it was. We just knew the ability to network and interconnect was going to lead to something. And could you imagine today's world without the internet? And when the teams that originally developed that didn't have a concept of what it was going to be today, but it had huge, huge impact. Where are those kinds of projects? Where has that funding gone? And with our reliance on moving and our dependence on companies being the ones that do the inventing, we run the risk of, inventing for financial gain versus inventing to discover, invent to build something that you're not quite sure, what is the outcome going to be for that. And so, what is the government's role? How much should the government fund? If you look at the U.S., Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and you look at R&D spend relative to a country like China, China's R&D spend is like off the scale. I mean, like literally like massive. Right now, you could argue that some of that investment or maybe major chunks of that investment are aligned with, government internally focused areas, right? But you can't argue with just sheer dollars, right? And then you look at the R&D funding, long-range R&D funding for large corporations, right? The Bell Labs of today under Nokia, albeit great people inventing some crazy cool stuff, but they're not at the scale or size that it was back when it was, Ma Bell. IBM Research, even HP Labs is not of the size and scale that it was when I was at HP. And so you've got the government backing off from its funding. You've got corporations backing off from their long-range funding. I think this is a huge challenge, and that is the lack of funding recognizing for long-range innovations. So the 4 challenges that we've talked about today, one is the ethics in innovation. And what does that really mean, given some of the high-profile ethic lapses in innovation, such as Theranos? Number 2, the unrealistic expectations from innovation. Number 3, the availability of funding for innovation. And number 4, government and even businesses' role in investing in long-range innovation. These 4 challenges we need to think about, you need to address. We need to think about how do we deal with this. Some of these are societal issues, such as ethics, leadership on unrealistic expectations, and, funding. All of these elements are pieces that need to come together to encourage innovation. But what these 4 challenges do is they actually discourage innovation. They put roadblocks up. They slow the innovation effort down, or in some cases, prevent innovation from ever happening in things like long range, 5-8 years plus out into the future types of innovations. Otherwise, everything is just short-term, incremental, flip it, make a quick buck, and we don't know what the future might hold. And the innovations that we could create can transform our lives and prepare us for something that we don't even see today. So think about this, 4 challenges facing innovation. I'm going to create a conversation over at the innovators.community to continue the discussion on these 4 challenges. Hop on over there, join the conversation. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. If you have any feedback on these 4 points, did I miss something? Was I too out there on the limb on some of this? Let me know. Hop on over to the innovators.community. As we wrap up today's show, thanks for listening and taking the time out of your busy schedule. If I could ask one quick favor, could you tell one friend about Killer Innovations? We're always looking for and searching out for new listeners, that people that could become part of this community who would benefit from what we are sharing here on the show, but also be contributing. Love to hear from you. If you've got ideas on guests or topics or things that you think we should cover or discuss, drop me a note over at phil@killerinnovations.com. Also, we have a disruptive ideation workshop coming up here in November in Washington, D.C. You can find out about it over at the online store at innovation.tools. Again, that's innovation.tools if you're interested. This is one of the few, I think this is actually the first workshop I've done that's open to the public in over 2 years, so you don't want to miss it. Innovation.tools. With that, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.